Ukrainian officials are warning citizens, telling them to prepare for more attacks, especially attacks by the Russian forces using these kamikaze drones. As we saw happen in Kiev over the last week or so, these kamikaze drones cause a lot of damage. They cause a lot of fear and panic, and to make things worse, Ukrainian officials are starting to report that some of the kamikaze drones that have been attacking Ukraine over the last week actually were launched from Belarus. So now that the U.S. is confirming that there are Iranian trainers in the Crimean Peninsula helping the Russian forces work with this weapon system, it brings up questions about whether or not Iranian advisors have made it all the way to Belarus. And all this being said, the fighting on the front lines continues. In Kherson, the Ukrainian military continues to push forward. And according to the Ukrainian military, Russian troops are retreating to the left side or the left bank of the Dnipro River. The Russians are framing it in a different way, saying that the Ukrainians want to destroy a dam and flood thousands of square kilometers of land and displace thousands of people. But the Ukrainians say that that's wrong, and the Russians are actually planning a false flag attack. And this is all happening while Ukraine continues to ask for more weapons, specifically to try and prevent these drone attacks from targeting critical infrastructure, making it very difficult for people to live here in Ukraine. There are still thousands of people across the country who are cut off from electricity and water because of attacks on critical infrastructure. Just yesterday, 3 separate attacks on electricity production facilities. And there's no sign that those attacks are going to give up. There was an air raid siren here in Kiev early this morning. There are already reports of attacks in Kharkiv that have injured people today, and in Zaporizhia, where Ukrainian forces have brought down some missiles, but others actually made an impact. So this is a developing situation, and the Ukrainians and the Russians know that this is a race against time. They both have supply issues, and they're trying to beat the other guy, basically, by having more weapons, and this is what Ukraine continues to ask for. Well, as the guest just explained, also the Russians continue to insist that it's the Ukrainians that actually want to hit the dam, while what we're seeing on the ground is actually Russia trying to move its troops from the right bank to the left bank of the Dnipro River. We're getting increased numbers of reports of this being the fact, especially following last night a bridge being destroyed, the Antonov Bridge being destroyed, which the Russians were using to try and retreat and pull out some of their equipment and soldiers. This all coincided also with the announcement of a large-scale, what the Russians called a evacuation. 10,000 people a day they wanted to evacuate. As of yesterday, there were around 10 to 20,000 people that had been already evacuated, according to Russian sources. But Ukrainians are saying that it's actually the Russians who have basically mined the dam, and as Rahul reported, and are using this kind of blackmail to tell Ukrainians that don't come past this point, otherwise we're going to flood all of these areas. And it's not surprising that Russia is announcing today that they've stalled this counteroffensive by Ukrainian soldiers, because today they also launched a massive missile strike. At least 12 missiles from Russia targeted several energy infrastructure facilities around the country. Many of those targets in northern regions, in Rivne, in Lutsk. There were some missiles that were headed for Kiev that were intercepted. So Russia has been conducting this kind of information war over the last 10 days, but it's also been able to cause a lot of damage to Ukraine's energy infrastructure, causing a fuss here in Ukraine. Definitely citizens being asked to conserve electricity use, but it's still continuing. These attacks are continuing day after day, putting a lot of pressure on Ukraine, its military, and its operations on the front lines. Well, these are Ukrainian citizens, and that's why Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, was actually sending a message specifically to them. Now, these Ukrainian citizens have, in some places, been under Russian occupation for long months now, some of them more than 6 months, since the start of this latest round of violence. But now that Russia is, it seems, on the run, as Ukrainians like to believe, because of this successful counteroffensive that Ukraine has been pushing forward with over the the last 8 weeks, it seems like Russia is trying to cover up its retreat. At least this is what Ukrainians believe. Now, martial law means that people are going to have to submit to the rule of these kinds of military representatives that are in charge of these areas. There's 4 of them. One of these areas that's been in the headlines lately is Kherson, for example, and there's huge movements happening on the ground there. Russia announced that it was going to be so-called evacuating at least 60,000 people from these towns and villages near the Dnieper River. But Ukrainians don't see this as an evacuation. Ukrainians see this as a forced displacement. And Western intelligence is saying that Russia is actually preparing to carry out a false flag attack on this dam that's supposed to flood this area and cover up Russia's retreat. That's what Ukraine and Western officials are saying. Russia is saying that no, the Ukrainians are actually attacking the dam and putting these citizens' lives in danger.
А ви другий теж підписали?